Hebrews chapter 4. Being a dad right now is just a lot of fun on a few fronts. One, Luca started laughing this past week. We finally moved him out of our room into the guest bedroom, so we slept a little bit better last night. But really the reason life is fun as a dad isn't really because of Luca. Luca's still, he's just not fun yet. He will be. But it's our 2-year-old Oliver. Oliver, it feels like he's learning something every week. And here in the last couple weeks, we're trying to instill in him a real sense of identity. That, man, I'm a Black. My last name's Black, for those that don't know that, when I say I'm a Black. But we're trying to instill in Oliver this identity. This, man, I'm a Black. This is who I am. And because I'm a Black, we have 7 words that define our family. And Oliver, he says all 7 words. I'll say, hey, we're going to say our 7 words. What's the first one? And I say love, and then he said love. Then he said faithful. Then he said humility, which is humility. Then he said integrity, courage, self-control, and grit, which is grit. And so those are the 7 words that can define us. And he started counting. He goes 1, 2, 3, and then he says humility. I was like, no, wrong test. Then he says 5, and then 6, and he says humility. And I said, no. But then he does 7, 8, 9, 10, and it's just really, really exciting with Oliver. But recently, I taught him to say, Mama hot. And Mama smoking. I don't know where she's at. I hope she's in here to see that. But part of it is, I want him to know that I love his mom. I'm attracted to his mom. But Oliver's very first word that he ever said was the word hot. It was like, we used to make fires all the time in the house where, hey, you can't go near that, hot. And so whenever he saw a light, whenever he saw a fire, that was the first thing he said, was hot. It wasn't mom, it wasn't dad, it was hot. I just learned the Greer's daughter's first word was Barney, which was really surprising. I was like, wow, Larry, what happened? But as we think about these things, right, about children, about babies, it brings us to Jesus. And it's fun just thinking about, man, I wonder what Jesus' first word was. Wow. We have no way of knowing. It certainly wasn't an English word because he wasn't American, though many people might think that. But I wonder, what was Jesus' first word? What was the first time Jesus got hurt? Like, did he stick a branch in his mouth? Did his dad forget about him and let him roll off the bed onto the floor? That definitely never happened to Oliver. But I wonder, like, what was it that made him get hurt? How many times did Jesus' parents discipline him out of their own frustration and anger? And things that he had to endure because his parents were imperfect, just like you and I. I wonder how he was disciplined. Was he put in timeout? Was he spanked? Was he his toys taken away? Was he taught to say yes sir, no sir in Hebrew or Aramaic? It's just, I just start thinking about these things, and it's just fun because we miss so often the humanity of Christ. I think about, man, if Jesus as a 9-year-old raced Micah, who would win? We have no idea of knowing. Would Jesus have made the wrestling team of Nazareth hot? Would he have been on the spelling bee team? There's so many things about Jesus. Was he bullied because his dad wasn't his biological dad? Right? In a Jewish community where that would have been, a scandal on top of scandal, like, would he have been bullied? Would he have been ostracized because his dad wasn't his dad? There's so many things that we can go down. What nicknames was he given? How did he respond to when his carpentry business wasn't performing as expected financially? What were the emotions he experienced at the loss of his first grandparent or his cousin John Baptiste or John the Baptist? And there's so many paths that we can go down this morning. And this morning, I'm asking these questions very purposefully because I want to come back to the humanity of Christ. the humanity of Christ is vitally important to our salvation. Because without the humanity of Christ, there really is no bridge for us to God. And we're going to see that this morning, is that Jesus is the bridge. But the reason he is the bridge is because he is fully human, just like you and I. And it really is really unfortunate, because even when I say that, many of us, because of our backgrounds, because of where we're at in our faith, we're like, yes, Jesus is fully human and fully God. But by saying that, we're almost saying, yeah, he's fully human, but he's like Superman human. He's like Batman human. He's like Spider-Man human. Like, yeah, he's human, but he's not really like us. He's kind of like a superpower human. But my hope is that we leave here unbelievably convinced, unbelievably convicted about the humanity of Christ, and it inspires us that much more to draw near to him and to follow him across the bridge to God. Are you with me? Let's read it. Hebrews chapter 4. We're going to pick it up in verse 14. As a church, we've been going through the book of Hebrews, and it has been so inspiring for me as we've just continued to get our eyes fixated on Jesus. The rhythm of the book feels like this. Look to Jesus, look to Jesus, look to Jesus. Here's a little bit of exhortation, a little bit of a warning, maybe not a little bit, a really big warning, but look back to Jesus. And we're actually coming out of a series of warnings and commands and exhortations in the end of Hebrews 3, as well as the beginning of Hebrews 4. The end of Hebrews 3 is, hey, today we are at the threshold of eternity. Eternity, it's coming tomorrow. It's going to be here in the midst. And today we are at that threshold. Please don't fall short. And the way we don't fall short is we encourage one another daily, as long as it's called today. And then in the beginning of chapter 4, as he's imploring us to cross that threshold into eternity, he says, and make sure the rest, the Sabbath rest that awaits us, the Garden of Eden, that make sure you don't miss out. And it really does push back on this idea of once saved, always saved. You go back and read it, it's hard to get past it. It really is. And I know that that's a debate over people that are way smarter than you and I, but we come face to face with, man, we've got to take this warning seriously, church. There's a Sabbath a Sabbath rest that awaits us all, that all of us desperately crave. Physical, emotional, spiritual, mental. This rest that, man, we might have it temporarily here on this earth, but it's always slipping through our fingertips. There's this rest that awaits. Please don't miss out on it. Even if you've been baptized into Christ, don't use that as an excuse not to persevere. As a cheapened grace of, yeah, but look at what I have. But no, be careful, because heaven's right around the corner. Heaven is coming tomorrow. Be careful you do not fall. That's the plea. At the end of 3 into chapter 4, as heaven is coming, please don't miss out. And so we come face to face with, man, all of us should be a little bit scared. In all reality, there should be a real level of fear in us. But the author is going to come in, and now he's going to try to breathe confidence in us. But what's so cool is he doesn't point to you for confidence. He's going to point to Jesus. And he's going to point to the humanity of Jesus. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14. Therefore, since this rest awaits, since heaven is on the brink, it's coming tomorrow, we're crossing this threshold. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who ascended into what? Heaven. Great high priest who ascended into heaven. Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weakness, but one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are. Yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, with boldness, so we may receive mercy and grace to help us in our time of need. Every high priest is selected from among the people and is appointed to represent the people in matters related to God. They're intended to be this bridge to God in order to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He, the high priest, is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and who are going astray, since he himself is subjected to weakness. This is why he has to offer sacrifices for his own sins as well as for the sins of the people, meaning the high priest of the Old Testament. We'll come back to this. And no one takes the honor on himself, but he receives it when called by God, just as Aaron was. In the same way, Christ did not take on himself the glory of becoming a high priest, but God said to him, "You are my son, today I have become your father." Psalm 2, verse 7. And as he says in another place, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who is able to save him from death. We should maybe think of the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus was heard because of his reverent submission. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered. And once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obeyed him, who had faith in him, who pledged their allegiance to him, and was designated by God to be high priest in the order of Melchizedek. Amazing passage, but we, without kind of a Jewish background, we really miss this in a lot of ways. Because there's this reintroduction, he's talked about it once already, but there's this reintroduction of a high priest. And this is really, really important because does anybody know the lineage of the priesthood, who the priest came through? Which are the sons? Which one? Levi. So all the priests came through the sons of Levi. Who was Jesus a descendant of? Judah, being a son of David. So Jesus could not have been in the lineage of priesthood because he was not in the lineage of Levi. This is going back to the Old Testament, the 12 sons, right? So he's part of the lineage of David, which allows him to be the Messiah. On this throne, my son will sit forever. He's going to rule with the scepter that he's going to conquer all the nations. That's Jesus, right? But how is Jesus also a priest? We're going to come back to that, but that's the crux of the matter. That's what the author is getting at. Jesus is this high priest that is this bridge to us and God. But he is not in the lineage of Levi. So how is it that he's going to be this high priest? Are you with me? Let's talk about priests just for a moment. And actually the Catholic faith paints a really great example of this. I'm going to bash on Catholicism a little bit. There's a lot of things about Catholicism that I genuinely respect. Their reverence, the way they uphold, they really do fight to uphold Scripture, though it gets a little wonky with how much they uphold the church and leadership. There's a lot of things about the Catholic Church that I think are actually worthy of being imitated. But there's a few things about the Catholic Church and the Catholic faith that are really, really dangerous. And one of it is the specific role of priests. Is anybody in here raised Catholic or once part of the Catholic? So a lot of us. Okay, great. So who is it the person that you're intended to confess to? The priest. You're required, I think, maybe that's not the right word, but you're required in the Catholic faith to confess your sins to the priest because the priest acts as the intermediary or the bridge between you and God. We see it in movies all the time. Right? Somebody walks into this room, they confess their sins. Father, I've sinned, please forgive me. He prays for them. He's that intermediary. The other way that we see this in the Catholic faith is their prayers. Oftentimes you'll hear Catholics praying to saints or saying their Hail Mary to Mother Mary. The reason they're doing that is they are praying to these followers of Jesus or the mother of Jesus in order to be their connection, their mediator, their bridge to Jesus. Are you with me? That's not uncommon of most Greco-Roman religions during Jesus' day, and it's definitely very applicable even to the Jewish faith. And this is why God gave his people priests, so that they could act as this intermediary between the people and God. Think of a priest as somebody who builds a bridge and repairs the bridge, constantly repairing the bridge. And so that's kind of the role of the priest. We see it in the Catholic, I'm only using Catholic religion not to bash them, but it just paints the picture of the role of a priest for a Jew. But it also helps us to see what Jesus is intended to be for us. And we can even begin to see why there's this danger of the Catholic faith. And so Jesus is intended not just to be a priest, but he's intended to be the high priest. There's only one high priest for the people of God, for the Hebrews, for the Israelites in the Old Testament. The high priest had a unique responsibility to enter what they would call the Holy of Holies, which is where they believed God's presence resided. And here in this passage, the author, he's giving two unique requirements of the high priest. It's not an exhaustive list. There's other requirements in the Old Testament. But the preacher here in Hebrews, he's giving two requirements, two of the many requirements of the high priest. The first requirement is they must be sympathetic to God's people. The second requirement, they must be called by God. And so what the author here in Hebrews is doing is he's showing us how Jesus fulfills both requirements. That he's able to be sympathetic towards the people, but he's also uniquely called by God. How is he uniquely called by God if he's not in the lineage of Levi? We're going to come back to that. But the first point is he must be sympathetic towards God's people. And that's what the author's saying in chapter 5, verse 1. Every high priest is selected from among the people and is appointed to represent the people in this matter to God, this bridge, right, to offer gifts and sacrifice, building a bridge, repairing a bridge. He's able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and are going astray because he himself is subjected to weakness. So he's able to be sympathetic because he can relate. He's human. He has shortcomings. He sins. And actually what the high priest would do is he would offer sacrifices first for his sins, and then he'd turn around and offer sacrifices for the sins of the people. Are you with me? That's Jesus' role with us. Jesus is able to be sympathetic with us because he has been tempted in every single way. I say that he was never tempted with the internet, right? Because the internet didn't exist. But the heart of the temptation, Jesus also endured. But we come face to face with this struggle again, this whole Superman version of Jesus, because we're like, all right, I get that Jesus was tempted in every way, but he didn't sin. So can he really relate to me? Are you with me? Yeah. There's actually a great argument that he can relate to you more because he's never sinned. A great quote by a gentleman named, I thought I wrote it down. I think it's F.W. Bruce. I'd have to look it up. You can ask me if you want to look it up for yourself later. But this is what he says of this idea. He says, sympathy with the sinner in his trial does not depend on the experience of sin. Sympathy with the sinner in his trial does not depend on the experience with sin, the partaking in sin, but on the experience of the strength of the temptation to sin, which only the sinless can know in its full intensity. He who falls yields before the last strain. Meaning, Jesus experienced the fullness of temptation because he didn't sin. I don't do this often, but I think this paints a really cool description of this idea. So if we can think of sin like pressure or temptation, let's not sin. I have to be careful with my words. Think of temptation like pressure. Sin creates temptation. We don't actually sin until we break or we choose to be disobedient, whether it's impurity, pride, selfishness, drunkenness, whatever it is. Pressure, the temptation to sin isn't sin in of itself, but we can think of temptation as we're beginning to bend, right? But we haven't sinned. And so the more we experience the pressure, the more somebody can relate to us. But eventually sorry Marie, eventually we crack, right? And that, I mean, you saw it didn't take a whole lot of pressure. But somebody who maybe resists sin a little bit more, you can see the difference in thickness. I hope I didn't envision this flying everywhere, but you can see so somebody that it goes through more pressure is able to actually relate to you more, because they really understand the temptation of sin to its fullness. And then we come here and it's like, I didn't know if I was going to be able to break this, and But it's not until the pressure, right? And so you can think of us as this wood that we won't understand the fullness without more pressure. Are you with me? But then we get to Jesus, and I'm not even going to try because I'm going to hurt myself. But no matter how much pressure I put on this, we could put it in a machine and obviously it would eventually break. But I can put as much pressure on it, but it's not going to break. Which means that Jesus understands the full weight of temptation. Jesus can relate to you more than anyone else. You think about the people that we often find ourselves drawn to. It's people that have similar experiences as us, that have been through similar difficulties. Jesus gets you more than anybody else. And there is no way I can communicate this in its fullness. You think of your best friend that maybe you don't even live in the same city as, maybe you do, but there goes a period of time where you haven't seen them, maybe it's been a year, 6 months, a couple weeks, but the moment you see him or her, it's like, oh my gosh, you're two peas in the pod. You just get each other. Jesus gets you like that on a whole nother level. And you might be sitting there and be like, yeah, but Jesus doesn't understand this sin. He does. Everything that you go through, he understands it, and he understands it in a way that you and I will never understand. It's like my son. My son, he gets to this point when it's late at night, and he's like me. I did it when I still do it to this day. Who am I kidding? When I get really tired, I just get slap happy. And my son, he just gets himself in trouble more. He's wild, he's crazy, gets hurt easier. He says things he's not supposed to say. I'm talking about myself to the same extent. But Catherine and I, we can literally see it. And we're like, oh, you're tired, dude. We gotta go to bed. No, please, no. And it's this huge hissy fit. And then we take him upstairs, we put his sleep sack on, and he starts sucking his thumb, and he's out cold. Jesus gets us more than we'll ever get ourselves. We have a high priest, brothers and sisters, that understands us intimately. And because of that, he's able to deal with us incredibly gently. This is where the grace of God comes into play. We're not dealing with a God that is stiff-arming us and is foreign to us and is unrelatable. We're dealing with a God who gets us. And it's a shame because we can throw so many things out there, right? Our society's always changing, whether it's gender identity, whether it's stances on cannabis, whether it's how we think education should be implemented, or social agendas. There's all these things that every generation experiences. And we can think, oh, it's unique, nobody understands, it's new, yada, yada, yada. We're on the threshold of finally bringing peace to humanity. You don't get it. You don't. Jesus understands all of it. And he just wants you to draw near to him. Jesus is the perfect high priest because he can relate to you. He gets you. He gets your thought process. He gets your desires. He understands your wants. He understands your temptations. He knows you. And guess what? Loves you. Immensely. And the Garden of Gethsemane is one of the greatest pictures of that. I don't know about you, but when I go through challenges and difficulties and temptations, it's very often that I actually don't want to turn to Jesus. The reason I don't want to turn to Jesus is I just think of his holiness. I just think of, which is good, right? There should be a reverence. We talked about this last week. But Jesus wants me to draw near. I think about us and Oliver. Whenever anything happens, we just want to wrap our arms around him. Hopefully not in a helicopter way. I'm sure we can tend to be helicopter parents to some degree or fashion. But in this, like, man, Oliver, there's nobody on this earth that loves you more than your mom and dad. Jesus certainly does, but on this earth, Jesus loves you, he cherishes you, and he understands you because he's gone through the pressures that you go through in increasing measure. Are you with me? Yeah. Jesus is the bridge because he is the mediator. Jesus is the bridge because he is the mediator. He's able to empathize with our weakness. But the second thing, it is actually rather confusing, because how can he be a high priest if he's not in the lineage of priesthood? He's not the descendant of Levi. And the author here, what he's doing is he's holding in tension the divinity of Christ and the humanity of Christ. It's remarkable what the preacher's doing here. And he's not pointing to the priesthood of Levi, he's pointing to the priesthood of Melchizedek. We're not going to dive into this a ton today because the preacher is going to explain it in more detail in chapter 7, which Sean Finch is going to preach on in a few weeks. But what he's quoting Psalm 2, verse 7, which if you get a chance, go back and read all of Psalm 2. It's all about this king who is son. And obviously selected, chosen by the Father. But then he quotes Psalm 110. And Psalm 110 is right. That's you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Melchizedek was alive was alive, and we see him come onto the scene during Abraham, which is long before the priests are ever chosen. And what's unique about Melchizedek is not only is he priest, but he's also king. And Jesus is from that lineage. He's king. Jesus is Lord of the universe. The God who created you and created me gets to know us intimately because he's also fully like us. This is what's so special about this passage. The reason that Jesus is the bridge is he's the mediator, but he's also the model. Not only is he the bridge that we cross over through the threshold from today into tomorrow for eternity, but he's also going to show us the way to do it. Because he's in the line of Melchizedek. And it's so special because this is what he goes into in verse 7, is this life that Jesus lives. And if I guess I should have noted, we get to approach God's throne with confidence, the throne of mercy with confidence, back in verse 16 of chapter 4, in order for him to help us in our time of need. Right? That's really, really important, because oftentimes, when is our crisis of faith? Our crisis of faith often happens when we don't believe God shows up when we need him most. Our crisis of faith happens when we go to God with our deepest desires for relationships. And God says, this isn't it. Desperately, as a single person, maybe wanting to be married. And God says, not yet. Or he says no. Our times of need, when we're pleading with God to interrupt on intercede on somebody's behalf, somebody we love that has had an incredible impact on humanity, that we're just begging God to heal them. And God says no. There are these like incredible moments of maybe not a crisis of faith, but they reveal our faith. Because it's in those moments that we come face to face with, all right, God, do I still trust you? Do I still trust you with the deepest desires of my heart? Do I still trust you with the people I love and cherish, even though you didn't intercede in this situation how I wanted? Right, we come face to face with, all right, yeah, but that's kind of the crisis of faith. And then the author here, he points out this passage about Jesus, our model. He says, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who is able to save him from death. and he was heard. We think of the Garden of Gethsemane. Father, if you would will, take this cup from me. 3 hours of agony, pleading with the Father for some other option, some other way. We don't know why. Or did he want to stay with his disciples longer? Was he fearful of the death that he was going to embark on? We don't know. But we know that he is unbelievably faithful, 100% obedient, falling down before the Father, begging God for another way. And it says the Father heard everything, saw everything. And he said no. You talk about faith. And Jesus obediently went to the cross. Why? He loves you, church. He loves you immensely. Talk about going to God with confidence. There's nothing that supersedes this. There's no life that you can live that supersedes this sort of love. There's no action you can do. There's no obedience that you can obtain. There's no works that you can accomplish that will give you this sort of confidence. It's only the love of Jesus. The grace displayed through Christ. And so Jesus, he models this example of what it looks like to go across the bridge. And honestly, I think it's a model that would serve us very, very well to really implement. When was the last time in your prayer life you offered up loud cries to God? When was the last time you got away, whether it was a prayer walk, beside a river, out into your backyard, into your basement, and you were bold with God? Like you really gave God the depths of your heart. Maybe you were frustrated. Maybe you felt hurt. Maybe you were pleading with God over this desire in your life. Like when was the last time we cried with God? When was the last time we were loud with God? We were bold with God? Church, I think as a body, we got to get back there. Yeah. That should just be our prayer life. Because you imagine what it would look like to imitate Jesus with this. You want to know what we would stop running to? We'd stop running to Netflix. Stop running to food. Stop running to alcohol. Stop running to work and busyness and trying to fill up this insecurity that's deep inside of us. We'd stop looking to politics and social agendas to fix our world, and we'd look to Jesus. And the more and more we'd experience the pressure of Christ, the more it would cause us just to look that much more to Christ because we'd see his faithfulness. I was talking to my wife about, man, what can we do based on this passage? And I thought about something a little bit flippant about approaching the Lord with humble confidence. But I really think we can take this up a bunch of notches. This week, I want every single one of us to go be audacious with God. To be real with him. To get authentic. If you're like, I've never yelled out loud to God, I don't even care if you're just like, I don't care. Like, I just want us to be real with him. To imitate Jesus in this capacity, because Jesus is our bridge. And it's only when we recognize that he is our mediator and our model that we get to go to that throne of grace with incredible confidence. There are so many things going on in this church right now. Great things and hard things. Great things with people studying the Bible, fighting to make real changes in their life that are incredibly overwhelming, that you made once upon a time too, that you remember how hard it was. We need to be begging God for these people, interceding for these people, crying for these people, yelling for these people, yelling against Satan, yelling to God. I don't care, just being wild with God. But there's also really, really hard things going on in our lives. Whether it's Miss Betty, Whether it's scares with Mark and Marie's health, scares with Steve, scares with some of our family members, hardships in relationships, audacious goals with playing for a chance. There's so many things, church, that, man, I think we got to repent a little bit. We've got to imitate the greatest human, the perfect human in Jesus. Giving up loud cries, fervent cries, approaching God with confidence, and allowing Him to prove faithful. Amen? So we'll have the singers come up for one final song, and I'll actually close this in a prayer this morning.
We, the Bowling Green Church, are a diverse family, devoted to the Bible, on a mission to love God, love people, and see this world changed for Jesus. If that's something you're interested in joining and becoming a part of, please leave a comment below or connect with us on our website or on Facebook. Our website is thebowlinggreen.church. We'd love to connect with you and passionately pursue Jesus together. Thank you so much for worshiping with us, and we look forward to meeting you.